Hi there, welcome to Boxing Deep Dive. I'm Lyndon Hosking, and great to have you along for another episode of Dream Fights. And we've got a ripper episode for you in this episode. But great to have one of our panel members back this week, the one and only Mike Altamura. How are you, Mike?
I'm great, thanks. I'm glad to be back. And I know Tassie Brown might disagree with me on the selection of these two fighters, but I think that this week's fight is intriguing because of, one, how offensively minded both guys are, but also how defensively flawed they are on the other side of it. So I'm not too bothered about what Tassie thinks. I think it would make a spectacular fight and be one of the highest selling fights in British boxing history.
I just want to say, this would be good if it was a bodybuilding competition, but a boxing fight, not as much. But I want to say, welcome home, Mike. I believe that when you're in, I think it was, I'm not sure if it was Kenya or one of the places you was at, you actually done a rain dance, and you actually, first time it rained in like 6 months.
This is the first I'm hearing about this rain dance business, but I'm glad to be home. I think you guys, I'm not going to say you're going to be blessed to have my presence, because after probably 2 weeks, you guys are going to probably be wanting to push me off this program. But I think I have about 5 or 6 weeks in me, and then I'm back on the road again. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the selections are going to be in the coming weeks. And I know Tassie has shunned a few of my picks over time, but usually he's relatively kind. So I'm not going to trash talk him too much.
I love you like a brother. I'm still getting over the Barry McGuigan, Jeff Fennick one, but
I just wanted to hear 4 panelists all stating that Barry McGuigan was going to get smashed. That's all.
Well, before I let Pete have a say there, I've got to say I'm rapt to have you back, because in the last few weeks, I don't know if it's by design or coincidence or whatever, but I seem to be the one that's always going against these two, and they're trying to gang up on me. So I know you know what you're talking about, Mike, and I know you'll back me up in who I've tipped. So.
Because Lyndon, you had a lot of tough fights in the amateurs, mate. A lot of hard spars by Lauren. Peter's fresh. You only had the one fight. I had pretty good defense, so I'm still fresh.
Well, Pete, I managed to upset you last week because I went against your man, Thomas Hearns. You're all right this week? You're over it, or are we all good to go for this week?
No, I'm over it. I'm okay with it.
Well, speaking of that fight, Mike, last week we did Canelo Alvarez and Tommy Hearns. I went for Canelo by 10th round knockout. My two associates here went for Hearns by
at light middleweight, Mike.
Light middleweight before
he knocked out Duran and he beat Benavidez.
Yeah, and Canelo was.
No, but getting back to Tassie, I don't know how you said I only had one fight. I don't know where you get your facts from, but you're wrong.
More than that, didn't you?
Anyway,
3-0, right?
Yeah, I did.
3?
Yeah, 3-0. So, but Tassie's always save it for the quiz, Tassie, tomorrow night.
I thought you only had the one, mate. Pardon my.
Well, you're from Tasmania, so it's okay. You guys are always a little below the scorecards here, mate.
We're just trying it. We've all started well here tonight, so we don't want to talk politics or states.
I wasn't trying to offend you, Peter. I actually thought you only had the one, mate.
No, I just said. I said, where did you get your facts from? I didn't say you tried to. I said, who told you that?
I think Pierre mentioned once you had one, but
no, Pierre wouldn't have said that.
But anyway. All right, well, let's before Mike, I get your pick on who you would have tipped. Let's go to.
Let's do the quiz tonight, then. Let's do
it tonight. Let's
do it.
The poll says it all, and this week, Canelo Alvarez, 56%. To the Hitman, 44%. Mike, who would you have tipped?
Your poll is incorrect.
Is that right?
At 154, I got to favour Hearns only because he was long enough to keep it on the outside. Obviously, Canelo had punching power, but I just look at 154, the version of Canelo that struggled with his range and distance against Amir Khan before catching him in, the 6th round. I just think he struggled with the range. Look, Erizandi Lara could offset anyone historically, but I just think if Hearns was able to keep him on the outside, he'd be able to rack up enough points. Obviously, there's the danger that Canelo could catch him with a singular shot and rattle him, but Tommy was pretty sturdy at 154. It's only when he started to get a little bit older and going against the bigger-bodied guys that his chin started to deceive him a little bit, but it's hard to pick against Hearns at 154 with anybody historically, especially
the best ever.
With someone like Canelo. I just think that the rhythm and the speed that Canelo fights at would have suited Hearns. I think that with Hearns, you got to make him, you got to feint, you got to make him panic, you got to put him under a little bit of pressure. If you got more that plotting 30, 40 punches around style, that would have suited Hearns and Emmanuel Stewart to the ground.
What do you know, Mike? Let's move on.
One second.
What?
I want to say the result on Instagram shows what idiots, TikTokers,
Oh, come
this
on,
generation's
mate.
about.
Canelo.
He tipped him. No, Tazzy, you got to that Lyndon tipped it, so everyone's entitled to their
but
opinion.
Lyndon can speak. Lyndon's an ex-champ. I'm talking about the generation know Canelo. They don't know, wouldn't know Tommy Hearns very well.
No, this is the one I want to ask Mike, because I couldn't believe it when you guys told us. 140 pounds, Manny Pacquiao, Constantine Tszyu. Please, Mike, explain what happens. So the Manny Pacquiao knocks out Ricky Hatton, and the Kostya Tszyu that fights Zab Judah. They're all
going to say to you, Pete. Every one of them is going to say to you that Kostya was a southpaw killer and this and that, but he never killed a great Hall of Fame southpaw like Pacquiao.
Yeah. What happens, Mike?
So they can go with that thinking all day, but the Pacquiao that fought the one that fought Hatton, the one that fought even at 35 against David Diaz, that's a generational talent. And I know a lot of people in Australia will slay me for saying it. Kostya was an outstanding fighter, a Hall of Fame. He wasn't a generational talent. So I got to favour Pacquiao.
What about styles make fights? Not about talent. Manny Pacquiao's going to go down as one of the greatest ever. Like, styles make fights. Now, Marquez caught him.
I'll tell you this.
Costa, right hand.
Zab Judah had a great round one against Kostya. He lapsed in the second round. He started to get tagged, but credit to Kostya. I just think Pacquiao with that speed, the timing in and out. Yeah, there's a chance Tszyu could time him and catch him, knock him out. Tszyu could do that to anyone historically. But if you're asking me, with my job on the line to give you an opinion, I've got to lean to Pacquiao. I think he was a greater fighter.
In what way? Tell me the result. Give me the
Pacquiao late round stoppage. Breaks him down.
All right. Well, I've got 10 other ones to quickly go through, Mike. Just a quick...
I agree
you just
with
did
Mike.
then, the fighter and the result. No need to analyse it too much, just who you think.
Sure.
So, first one, Julio Cesar Chavez, Alexis Arguello.
Chavez on points, great fighter.
George Kambosos, Barry Michael. That one was credit to Pete. That one.
Baza on points. Different era, different style, different fighter.
Roy Jones Jr. and Marvelous Marvin Hagler.
Roy too fast. Turns him inside and out all night. 12-round decision.
I think we all went for Jones. This was my one. Vinny Pazienza and Ricky Hatton.
What a fight. What a fight.
Yeah.
Hatton, like split decision, but on another day I could give you a different outcome. That's a hell of a fight.
Yeah. Oh, you'll love this one. Roberto Duran, Julio Cesar Chavez.
Oh.
At 35?
Yep. Lightweight. Yep.
No one beats Duran at that weight.
Duran.
No one.
That's also
Duran on points because Chavez was so fucking tough that I couldn't see Duran stopping him.
Yep.
But Duran, 15-round decision.
All right, this was Tassie's. Jeff Horn, Shannon Taylor. Welterweight.
At welter, so not junior welter, at welter.
Welter.
At welter, again, controversial, Shannon Taylor.
We all went for Shannon
That's
Taylor.
what we all went for Shannon.
I think Shannon Taylor was crazy in that he chased the only guy at the weight at the time that he definitely couldn't beat.
Mosley,
of the champions. Andrew Sixheads Lewis, James Page, all those other guys at the weight, Shannon could have beaten him, but he chased Sugar Shane Mosley, who no one was going to touch.
Mike Tyson versus Tyson Fury.
You got to go with Iron Mike.
I went for Iron Mike. I think I was the only one.
Yeah, I think historically, if Fury accomplishes what he possibly could the next 2 years, it could change. But if Steve Cunningham's capable of getting inside and knocking him down, I think a prime Tyson could.
That's what I said. That's what I said.
Yeah. This was my one. Sugar Ray Leonard, Oscar De La Hoya, welterweight.
That's a hell of a fight. think Sugar Ray, bit more versatile. Would know that he's got to take Oscar's left hand out of play, and I think that he edges him down the stretch. But it's a very close fight.
Would be. Now, this was Tassie's one. You'll love this one. Carlos Zarate, Ruben Olivares.
Rockabye Ruben. I spoke to Tassie on the phone earlier about this fight. I think that the only measure that Zarate maybe is slightly higher than Olivares in is chin. Zarate probably one of the great all-time chins. In his prime, that is. Olivares better puncher, better technician, sharper, better movement, more fluid style. I just think Olivares got too many tools in the artillery, but two dynamic punches, it'll be a warfare, that one.
And what was the result? Olivares. Okay.
Olivares, yeah.
And you've just given us Hearns to beat Alvarez. Mate, that's the reason we've got you on the show. That was expert analysis in 15 seconds or less for each fight. So that was awesome. Didn't agree with all your picks, but that's why we're here, isn't it?
That's why we're here. It's boring if it's 4-zip every week.
That's what I try and say every week. But then I got to put up with Tassie and Peter shouting me down. So I'm glad you're here to back me up.
Occasionally, I support them shouting you down.
All right, on to this week's episode. Mike, your pick again. You touched on it earlier in the piece. Who have you got?
This is a British super fight. You've got Frank Bruno versus who many people say is this year is Frank Bruno in Anthony Joshua. I think that two dynamic punches. Bruno, former WBC world champion. Joshua has been a unified world champion. Both two of the biggest draw cards in British boxing history.
And Tassie, I've made it 12 rounds for the heavyweight title. Wembley Stadium. It couldn't be anywhere else, could it?
Oh, massive. Couldn't be anywhere
80,000
else,
people.
mate. Unbelievable, huge fight. I don't think Anthony Joshua is very popular. I don't think he's really captured the country like Frank Bruno. Frank Bruno was loved by all of England. I'm sure Joshua was popular. Is it safe to say he's probably never as popular as Bruno, Mike, you think?
100%. I think that with Anthony Joshua, the attraction is that when he fights, it's a spectacle. When Bruno fought, it was like a member of the family was stepping into the ring. So the kind of love and fandom for each of them is very, very disparate. So I think you're right on the money there.
Well, he won a gold medal, AJ, and was obviously made into a superstar by Hearn, and he backed it up in the ring too, he won the title. The seesaw fight with Klitschko was really raised his stock. And Bruno, captured the hearts, as I said, I remember Henry Cooper was the biggest name in England, Sir Henry Cooper. And Joe Bugner said it was the worst thing I ever done when I beat Henry Cooper. The whole of England turned against him. And I think it'll be the same with this. If you're, an English guy versus Bruno, you're going to be the B side, no matter what.
Look at Lennox Lewis.
Yeah, 100%.
Pete, do you agree with the? I'll just bring you up there, Pete. Do you agree with the popularity thing? Because at the time, what do you put it down to with Bruno? I was only a young kid, sort of, as you probably were when he was just starting out, but the popularity factor was just amazing, wasn't it? He didn't really fit the stereotypes, but like the guy said, he's probably the most popular British fighter ever, apart from Henry Cooper, and that's debatable as well.
Yeah, but England, they're funny people. I saw Bruno as a lovable loser. You'd get him right up there. Like, what do you happen with Tim Witherspoon? He's got 40,000 people there and keeps eating right hands. A fight that was set up for him to win and gets knocked out like a mullet, and they love him. So that's, how do you put it?
And Witherspoon...
Like, if it was in Australia, we'd be saying, get rid of him, turn him into a meat pie. But English, they kind of have this... The English have this kind of like, they like neighbours, they like bringing back old acts, they like nostalgia type. If he wins or loses, we still love him. So he was that guy that he won a few, he lost a few, and we loved him. So I think that's
Can I
what
say
they
something?
kind of...
No quiz tonight, because Peter's on fire tonight. Peter's on tonight.
But Pete,
I've
you
been having
mentioned
the black
the,
coffees today.
Pete, you
Tassie, not the
mentioned
latte.
Pete, you mentioned the Witherspoon fight, but you're right. Witherspoon actually did his best to hand him the title on a platter as well, because he came in about 30 pounds overweight. If you remember, he was just a fat blob.
Yeah, but he just kept landing that overhand right, that bowler punch straight on the chin. And, I mean, Bruno was boxing beautifully, but he just kept eating it. And I think it was the 11th round he finally copped it and he succumbed to it.
Just one note. You said that Witherspoon stepped in 30 pounds overweight to hand him the title. But Andy Ruiz stepped in about 70 pounds overweight to hand the title back to AJ.
I'm probably more talking about his normal fighting weight. Witherspoon was probably a 220, 225 fight. I think he got in there at close to 250 or 255, whatever it was, where I think Ruiz has always been about 300 pounds. So, but yeah, it was just amazing. Well, let's have a look at the records. We'll go to Anthony Joshua first. You can see there 24-2, 22 KOs, obviously still going. He's got some big fights planned for this year. You see there the Commonwealth Heavyweight Champion in 2015, won the IBF Heavyweight Championship in 2016, the WBA in 2017, the WBO in 18, and then after losing him to Ruiz, regained all of them in 2019. And I've just put in there 4 of his probably biggest wins: the Dillian White KO, Klitschko, Joseph Parker, which is actually wrong. It was a 12-round decision, so apologies for that one, and the rematch against Andy Ruiz. So, Tassie, what are your thoughts on Joshua? Do you think I think one of you guys said before he's the modern day version of Bruno? Is that the way you see it?
Probably physique-wise, like the big muscles and the sort of very big upper body, bodybuilder style guy. Probably, I meant like with that physique and probably a bit of a suspect chin as well. But he won an Olympic gold medal. So, I mean, that was, you don't give those away. That was massive. He took the limelight quite well. I mean, he was thrown in pretty early. He won a title quite early against a dud, Charles Murray. But Eddie Hearn had him pack it out Wembley. He's a superstar. I mean, and recent English fighters, there's none bigger than Joshua. So he's handled that well. He can obviously fight. He can bang a bit like Bruno, as both a bit chinny, both have power, and just that big upper body, maybe too big for boxing style build,
Mike, do you think, my opinion of Joshua is I think he's done so well to handle the hype, because it wouldn't have been easy coming after Lewis and Bruno and just being that next hope of British boxing, because they hadn't had a lot of success probably since Lewis. And to have that on your shoulders, especially after winning the gold medal, would have been a tough one to handle, I think. What do you reckon?
Yeah, definitely. Look, it's easy now that he's got the 2 career losses just to discount that, especially with the Andy Ruiz fight at MSG. He just didn't handle the occasion how we'd become accustomed to him being able to take everything in his stride. But you're right in the sense there was a lot of pressure on him. The first real firefight he was placed in was with Dillian White, who had beaten him as an amateur. And he was able to overcome some shaky moments, come through. Was perfect against Charles Martin for the world title. Overcame, again, knockdown and a lot of shaky moments with Klitschko in an absolute war, and was able to handle the spotlight pretty well. So I think that when you look at the sum of all his parts, he's been I'm not going to say a great heavyweight world champion, but he's been a very good heavyweight world champion. He definitely hasn't been a disappointment. And I think that he transitioned well, especially, like Tassie said, he won an Olympic gold medal, but it's not like he had 200 amateur fights. He had probably somewhere between 40 to 60 amateur fights total. It's not like he had a lot of seasoning. He started boxing relatively late. So I think that his ability to handle the occasion, especially in the UK, you've got to give him a passing grade.
Hey, Mike.
Sorry, go ahead.
How did Audrey Harrison handle the spotlight?
Audley handled it pretty terribly, but that said, he turned pro at 29 years of age, so he might have left his best in the amateurs. I think we can judge Audley harshly, but he maybe was done by the time he was 32. So everything that played out in his career post that fact was just him being a little bit over the hill and washed up as well.
Pete, do you think that Joshua, as the years have gone on and the fights have gotten bigger, that he's changed his style a little bit? Because he seemed to be a lot more aggressive early in his career. I know you've got to alter your style when you're coming up against the best fighters in the world, but do you think he got a little bit, or probably more back into his shell a little bit as his career's gone on a little, do you think, or not?
Look, I think he's always been the A side. He's always had the money company behind him. He's always had things his own way, booked his own dates, booked the opponents they wanted. His development's good. I mean, he's an excellent amateur as well. He's very robotic. For a guy 6'6", he's not bad. But in a different era, I don't think he survives as a top 10 guy. But in today's era, with today's fighters, there's only a few. There's not much like depth there, so he can survive and you can pick your moments. And that's what they do. They pick their moments with him. I mean, he is chinny. He for me, doesn't have that X factor. He's very basic, but he is very good as well. He can beat the mediocre guys, and there's a stack of them out there. So he can survive, and he's got a big network behind him. He does have to travel in people's backyards and fight guys on, not much preparation. Everything's tailor-made to his whole career, and he's making dollars, and he's surviving, and he's pulling his end. I mean, he's copped a few losses. He lost to a cruiserweight Usyk, and that he's got to cop that. I mean, they're saying he's going to have a rematch. Well, let's wait and see if he can beat Usyk again. But that Ruiz loss probably hurt him the most, because Ruiz just looked like he looks like a truck driver, but we know he's got pretty fast hands. Mike and I saw him fighting Macau. I mean, he's a decent guy, but he'll lead out a buffet. He's not really a guy that, if you're going to leave a legacy, and he's not really a puncher that you lose to like that. So that hurt him a bit. But since then, he's been okay. I mean, he's lost to Usyk. It was okay. It wasn't like he was disgraced. He still put in a good effort. But you can't, I mean, he wouldn't survive in another era, in another time, in my opinion, being an upper echelon fighter.
Before I get to Bruno, Mike, one thing that's always disturbed me a little bit about Joshua is that the losing doesn't seem to hurt. And I know it sounds a bit funny, but when he loses, like, whatever. It's not like it means the world to him.
Well, he's got
all the talent
50 million in the bank.
Yeah, he's got all the money in the world.
He was the same as an amateur as well.
Yeah.
So when he had no money, I think he perceives boxing differently. For some people, this is a way of life. For other people, they just perceive themselves as a sportsman, as an athlete. And the irony is that was always the critique of Bruno, that they always said he was a hellacious puncher, but he didn't have a killer instinct, because he would say things like, boxing isn't about trying to hurt another man or render your opponent unconscious. It's about winning the contest and being able to go to your families afterwards. So I think that the mindset is similar in that regard, but I think that's how AJ perceives it. I don't think that should take away from his character or the kind of athlete that he is inside the ropes. I mean, we can sit here and criticize and, try and say that maybe against Ruiz he didn't hunger or he didn't want it bad enough or whatever, but he dusted himself off and came back and won the rematch. And even with Usyk, it's not like he went into a shower in round 9, 10, 11, 12 and wasn't trying. He was still trying to win the fight. So I think that just because he maybe perceives it a little differently to what we feel a warrior should have ingrained in them, I don't think that we should judge him harshly on that.
No, you're right. I suppose I was just comparing to someone like a Mike Tyson that just got totally different personas. But speaking of Bruno, let's have a look at his record. 40 wins, 5 losses, 38 knockouts. Not a lot of titles to his name there, but he fought in some massive fights. You can see the European Heavyweight Champion in 1985. The WBC Heavyweight Champion in 95 with an unbelievable win over Oliver McCall. You can see his biggest wins there. Jerry Coetzee, I haven't put the result there, but he knocked him out in the first round. In 86, Witherspoon, he lost in the 11th round, I think Pete said earlier. The Joe Bugner knockout in 87. The 2 losses to Tyson in 89 and 96. Lewis in 93. And Oliver McCall he beat, as I said, in 1995. And he was really a bit of an enigma, wasn't he, Tassie, Frank Bruno? He was like the big lovable giant, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. I think he done
punch, obviously.
pantomime and all that stuff. And I think it's what Lennox Lewis gave it to him as a bit of a, how can you say it? I mean, you got your I think Lewis made a few sort of things, that he's a bit of a more of a white man sort of thing, like he appealed to the white English and a bit more sort of, as I said, doing pantomimes and all that. So I think Lewis even questioned his sexuality. So that was pretty big build up with that fight with Lewis. I think he went below the belt a bit, Lennox, but I was never a fan of Bruno, to be honest with you, mate. That era of heavyweights in the Tyson era was pretty woeful to me. Witherspoon was good, but the Burbicks and the fucking Tony Tuckers, Tony Tubbs, and Pinklin Thomas and Bonecrusher Smith, to me, not a great era. And Bruno was in that era. Nice guy, done well, but I never really rated him or thought much of him really as a fighter.
Just Pete, Tassie's right on the era of the heavyweights that he fought in. Do you think that Joshua, up until probably the last 2 or 3 years, it was in the same boat? There was heavyweight division was absolutely woeful there for a while, wasn't it? And I suppose you could almost point that at the Klitschko's when they reigned. There wasn't a lot around. I know it's a little bit different now, but you put
Fury freed the belts up.
Yeah, but Deontay Wilder and Fury. I mean, Joshua hasn't fought either one of the two. He fought Klitschko and he was washed up. So they've been careful with him. So you get a guy like Tyson Fury. Let's just go back to him. At least he's fought guys. He fought Klitschko in his prime in Germany, and he's fought, Deontay Wilder 3 times. He's been in that kind of situation where it's more respected than what Joshua's. Joshua's is a bit more kind of safer route that he's had so far, and he's copped a few little hiccups on the way, but he hasn't copped any major disasters. But the time he fights Deontay Wilder and the time he fights Tyson Fury, if he can beat both, we'll look at him completely differently to the way we look at him now. And there's no reason why he can't put in great performances, because he hasn't got much hookworm. He hasn't been beaten up too much. He's not banged up. He's still pretty fresh. And mentally, guys that don't take losses too heavily are pretty good, I think, because they don't have depression. They don't self-doubt themselves. They're quickly back on the bike and it's back to normal. Pacquiao's the same. If Pacquiao really doubted himself after losing to Jeff Horn, everyone, Roach, retire. Bob Arum looks like he should retire. The Filipino, Manny didn't retire. Manny got a renaissance of a second career because he doesn't listen to people. He's himself. He says, I lost the fight, I'll keep going. And I think Joshua's pretty much the same. It's just what happens now. I don't know if Joshua's peaked and is a bit of a guy that was just like put in a position where he achieved this success because he was a gold medalist and he had a good promotional team behind him, or is he going to be the guy now that carries on and wins the respect of the hardcore fans? That's where Joshua's from. Frank Bruno, Frank Bruno was okay, but you look at Frank Bruno, he looked like a giant back in those days. Frank Bruno's only 6'3". Fighters today, 6'9", 6'6", he'd be a smaller type of guy. And he's very robotic. Bruno's more robotic than Joshua. So it's a real sort of situation where how do you pick it? But you will meet a more popular, hard-hitting fighter than Bruno. Even when he was getting knocked out, you still were hoping he didn't. He was so well-loved, but where do you put him and where do you put this fight? It's a real enigma because we don't know where Joshua really sits. Joshua, if he was to fight Wilder or Fury and get knocked out, we'd be saying he's really, really down below the rake. But if he was to beat one of them, well, it's one of those situations it's still wait and see with Joshua.
Yeah, Mike, you can see this fight here against Jerry Coetzee where he knocked him out in the first round and looked like he was, indestructible. But it was probably obviously a bit of false economy because after this he fought... he fought Witherspoon after this, but he fought Tyson after he did the same thing to Bugner. But
Bruno struggled with guys that could absorb. So, Joe Bugner probably absorbed as much as anyone in a loss against Bruno. Joe must have had a chin of absolute iron because he took a lot of flush shots. But Bruno, to me, deceivingly, is probably one of the hardest hitters ever in the heavyweight division. If you look at guys like Mike Evans, Jose Revolta, Jesse Ferguson, all them guys that could get under someone's skin and take him 4, 5, 6, 7 rounds, Bruno blasted every one of them out in 1 or 2 rounds. And when a lot of those guys have been interviewed in years later, they've said he was by far the hardest hitter they'd fought, even guys that had fought Tyson. Yeah. So I think with Bruno, it's what he could absorb and whether the occasion would get the better of him. offensively, Pete's right what he said before. He's stiff, he's robotic, he's a lot more robotic than Joshua, but he's also a more dynamic puncher than Joshua. You know, times you'd feather someone with a hook and they'll be out cold off the shot. So I think with Bruno, it's what could be absorbed. Tim Witherspoon was hurt in the fight but absorbed. James Smith was hurt in the fight but absorbed, down on all cards, knocked him out in the 10th round. Lennox Lewis was buckled and rattled all over the ring in the 3rd round, come back. Tyson got buzzed end of round 1 in the first fight, come back to stop him. The only fight that Bruno was ever in as a professional where he didn't hurt the opponent and lost was a second fight with Tyson, the rematch in 96. And he had eye problems at that point and literally went into the ring just for a payday, knowing it was just a payday, knowing that he didn't stand the snowball's chance in how to win the fight. So I think that when you look at Bruno, it's a shame that he's haunted by some of those losses, even though he became a world champion. But there's an element of danger from him against everybody. And I think that that's why I looked at this conversation of this fight, and I wasn't just leaning one way or the other, because Bruno's a dynamic enough puncher that he's a threat to AJ, especially given AJ hasn't absorbed the best shot. But also AJ's just demonstrated time and again that he can overcome adversity. And with Bruno, if you could recover from the early woes where you might get rattled, buckled, and hold it together and outbox him long enough, eventually he falls apart in the second half of the fight.
So, well, while you're going there, let's start with you. Who wins and why?
Is this over
I've
12 rounds
flip-flopped
or
on
15?
this.
12 rounds.
Oh, okay.
I've flip-flopped on this about 50 times. So part of me could see Bruno catching him early and stopping him in like 4 or 5 rounds. But I just look at balance of probabilities suggests that I think Joshua has accomplished at a higher level, not just because it's a different era, but I think that mentally he's been more solid of being able to hold it together when the script isn't rolling his way. And I think that he would be able to absorb the early storm. He might get knocked down. He's definitely going to get wobbled at some point. He might get knocked down. But I could see Joshua putting together smoother combination punching, getting the jab going, and possibly stopping Bruno in maybe 8 or 9 rounds.
Yeah, well said. How about you, Tassie?
Yeah, I think like Joshua's best wins, obviously, Dylan White was massive for me because look what Dylan White's done since. And Klitschko, even though, yeah, we say he's past his best, but still got the victory. I think Joshua beats Bruno. I think, yeah, you know, they're both sort of similar. I think Joshua's a bit better boxer, a bit quicker. I don't think he gasses as much as Bruno did. And, yeah, I'll go for Joshua via knockout, you know, any round between 4 and 8.
Okay. All right. How about you? We'll go to you then, Pete. That was Mike. Pete, who wins and why?
I think the fight starts pretty well and Bruno wins the respect of Joshua, wobbles him around a bit. Joshua then gets on his bike, boxes neatly, and survives all those early rounds and then just basically patters a 12-round decision. Safety first. Very similar to the second fight with Ruiz. He just won't take any risks. He'll respect the power of Bruno and stay on the outside, being 6'6". He'll just box and move. And Bruno fades badly in the last part of the fight as well. So it would have been a situation where he's happy just to box and survive and win a decision after copping a bit of a hurricane early in the fight.
Yeah, well, I think for the first time, I think we're all in agreement. So I agree with both you guys, especially what you just said then, Pete. I think Bruno is obviously always dangerous early. He would come out throwing bombs. I just think he wasn't really fast or with his hands or with his feet. I think Joshua would probably read him very easily. I think Joshua would play it safe for 4 or 5 rounds and then gradually get on top. And I'm going to say maybe 10th or 11th round he would stop Bruno, who was probably going to be exhausted by that stage. And just the size factor as well. Joshua's obviously a hell of a lot bigger than Bruno as well, as I think Mike said earlier, as far as the size. Pete, I think it was, said about the size factor these days. So I think, yeah, Joshua gets on top, 10th or 11th round stoppage, I would think. I don't think he knocks him out. I think the referee saves him or his corner saves him. One thing about Frank, he was always brave. He always went out on his shield. Yeah. So I think, yeah, Joshua by, I'll say 10th round or 11th round stoppage. So I think that was a clean sweep for Joshua, guys. Would have been a great fight. I can just imagine they probably would have got 100,000 at Wembley Stadium and probably could have sold it out twice, I would think. So that would have been great. So wonder what it would have been like, even Tyson Fury and Frank Bruno, Mike. That would have been another good one as well.
Oh, definitely. Although I think that would, unless Bruno caught him, would be one-sided. But you're right. I'll tell you the other part that intrigued me with Bruno and AJ. I think it's the first time that AJ will be stepping into the ring where he's not the fan favorite, where he'd maybe have to be a little bit of the villain in the lead-up or be perceived like the villain. And I know that Lennox Lewis struggled with that a lot building into the fight. I know Lewis struggled with it when he fought Gary Mason. He felt like the fans in the UK were on Mason's side. But definitely when he fought Bruno, because Mason was best friends with Bruno, definitely when he fought Bruno, he felt not necessarily the hatred, but the opposition of the British public. And I think that would have been intriguing to see how AJ would handle that, because he's always been accustomed to being just beloved by the public, and it wouldn't be the case when they're on side with Bruno.
And he seems to be a sensitive type of guy too, doesn't he, Joshua? And I think that would actually get to him. So be amazing. But no, great pick, Mike. Great to have you back, and obviously pick tonight's episode. Pete, we're back to you next week. Have you got someone in mind?
Terence Crawford up against Manny Pacquiao at welterweight.
Oh, who was it? Crawford was Whittaker, wasn't it, a few weeks ago? We've got to get your man Manny in there, don't we, Taz?
I think it'll be an interesting fight. They were meant to fight.
Peter's got dual citizenship to the Philippines, mate. He can come and go as he pleases. He's huge. I
like the fight. Hang on. So what is it? A welterweight, lightweight, light welterweight? What weight?
Welterweight. Welterweight.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was super lightweight. But
Crawford that's knocked out Cal Brook, and the Crawford that's done all the damage to all these top notches, up against, say, the Pacquiao that's been fighting Bradley and Mayweather and whatever. I mean, yeah.
All right. No, so Terence Crawford, Manny Pacquiao it is. But yeah, look forward to that one. So that's it, guys. That's another episode in the books. Anthony Joshua picked unanimously to beat Frank Bruno. And would have been a great British fight anyway. So we look forward next week, guys, to Terence Crawford and Manny Pacquiao. Look forward to having you out there. If you've got a request, make sure you let us know. We're on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and all the rest of it. So, send us a line and, we'll see what we can do. Last week, obviously, we had Nathan Mitchell, I think his name was, who was picked the Canelo and Hearns fight. So we might do that every few weeks as well. So thanks again, guys. Tazzy, you look like you need some sleep there, mate. We'll see you next week.
Big day, mate. Big day.
See you guys. See you, Tazzy. See you, Mike.
See you, boys.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.